Right. So do we let algorithms diagnose disease and be an agent of some variety? Well, some people and some organisations say, yes, completely, that's what we should do. And maybe one day we will. But I guess I would always say safety comes first.
Phrase, right? Data-driven decision making. What does this mean? We're gonna ask. The question we're going to ask is how far do we relinquish control? But let's put a bit of definition on it first, right? We've all been into lots of websites and apps, and we use them for a while, and then they come back and they tell us something, some recommendation or whatever, and that's all data doing its clever stuff in the background. But now we've started to push this into not only companies looking at their data and making decisions in their boardrooms, right? But for instance, we've got customer service agents who are, previously might have used their knowledge and experience of their business, their product, their service that they're serving you on, now are getting a prompt on the screen that says, don't say that, say this, or upsell them on this, or do this. And they're taking away that. So in my own company, we have wine advisors, right? Our customer service agents, this is going to come out wrong, they regularly taste wine. Right? We train them. We get them to understand what our product is. They have, yeah, no, but it's not your job. So and we get them to have some knowledge of the product that they're giving customer service on. But I could implement a system which, when it comes up, says sell them this bottle of wine because it gives us the highest revenue, or because that's the particular winemaker that we're pushing this month, or something. So data that is driving people to take actions, not necessarily decisions, but take actions. Is that a good thing? How far do we relinquish control? Sam, you're grabbing the mic. Go for it.
Well, look, people have talked about the digital doctor for ages.
Right.
So do we let algorithms diagnose disease and be an agent of some variety? Well, some people and some organisations say, yes, completely, that's what we should do. And maybe one day we will. But I guess I would always say safety comes first. So I think it's really important that we use the data. We're data-driven in our decision-making. We apply the science. We use the outcomes from data. But I don't think we're in a place yet, from a regulatory point of view, the sophistication of the algorithms and the ability to do so safely, to completely let the data sort of drive itself. And certainly our customer service agents are not going to be testing our products before anyone else gets them, given that a lot of what we do is Viagra. So I think it's really important that we do trust data where it's high quality and we can make good decisions from it. And I definitely think there's a place for it. But I would be very concerned if we just sort of let it go and do it, run on its own. And I've seen this when I used to be in the NHS and responsible for 999 and 111, which is completely algorithm based. So it's the same set of algorithms used across both of them, across the entire of England and now Wales as well, and used for the COVID algorithms as well, which we built like 10 years ago. And all of those are still driven by people, but they're still designed based on the data that comes out from the use of them, that's constantly reapplied. But there's still people in between to make human decisions, which I think is still important in healthcare. Okay,
sticking with the healthcare for a second. James, I'm thinking now of a use case where we've all been to the GP, right? And the G is the key here, right? They can't know everything. There's a heck of a lot. There's new medicines coming out all the time. Surely data is a real friend to a GP. If they could sort of sit there on their computers and say, this person's telling me they've got this, and it suggests some medicine to them, that's a useful thing, isn't it?
Most definitely. I agree with it's a bit useful. I'm sure there's no GPs in the room because they probably would have attacked you by now.
Okay, fine.
For defaming their name. But I think, for me, when I thought of this question, I thought about being back at the fairground or something, right? Or if you've got kids, we're all kids at some point, I think, and you play whack-a-mole, right? The little thing that pops up.
Great game.
You can see the analogy straight away, right? Without data, you're playing whack-a-mole without knowing when something's going to pop out the next hole. Imagine if you had the data that told you exactly what was going to pop up when. Completely changes how you play the game. You're able to anticipate what's coming next. I see it exactly the same when you're asking the question about, is it that useful? Of course it is. And data-driven clinical decision support, super helpful, whether you're a GP or whether you're a radiologist. So in North London, we look after North London Breast Screening Service, cares for 2 million women across the city, right? We do about 70,000 mammographies a year, but we've got a shortage of radiographers. So at the moment, we use an AI as one of the radiographers. And that analyses the images, and it doesn't replace human. To Sam's point, you have to have 2 radiographers to analyse an image. And if they agree, follows the process. If they disagree, goes to an arbitrating reader. But using AI, now, data-driven decision-making, we can replace the second radiographer, so we can do twice as much with the same amount of resource.
Wow.
And that's where I think it comes in. But I think the public, there's so much data-driven decision-making we don't always realise. We're flying between countries, autopilot, what's that driven by? People are happy to get in a driverless car. Well, that's had different outcomes. But you can see how it happens. Sometimes unknowingly we surrender to data-driven decision-making without realising it. But when it becomes to our own personal health, or it's much closer to home, we're much more sensitive about what we're willing to accept and where our risk appetite is towards leaning on that data-driven decision-making.
Okay, so helping me select my wine's okay. Diagnosing my illness. Needs a bit of work, but sounds like, you know, saving actual money, but also extending the number of patients that can be seen in any given time. That's a real valuable use case, right? That's huge. Jess, so, you know, in terms of data-driven decision-making, I mean, you've been hanging around for data for years. Joe, you may feel the same about this. You know that data's been valuable all this time. Why is it suddenly getting this visibility in terms of people going, well, we'll let the data tell us what to do now?
So you kind of get several aspects to this. You get ones where actually it can save corporations money because they can make people redundant. That's the bad side of it, because we've all spoke to chatbots, and you can automate to the nth degree there, where you can do everything driven by the algorithms, and for a lot of things that actually works for some companies as opposed to having somebody there. You can use it to augment what your people are doing by helping them, so you've got a minimum level. So it's like, have you checked this? Have you checked that? And that works quite well hand in hand. And that's quite a good intelligent use of it. And you still allow your customer service people then to have a certain amount of autonomy as well. So it's not just like speaking to a chatbot, but you know, they're not just reading the script, they're actually using their personality as well. And then you do get the things where, as you were saying, actually one of my friends helped write the stuff for the checking for cancer cells. Things like that are great, but it still needs a certain amount of checking. And that's basically what you do in any machine learning routine. You retrain and you do check your output and you work over bigger amounts. And so long as you're doing that, just to keep an eye on things, because it's the edge cases we always worry about, and they're the things which end up costing us the most or being the most damaging. So long as you're feeding back into it and checking a certain amount, there's so much value there in allowing your data to help automate some of that.
Right. So I'm hearing a definite balance here, right? We can't just totally relinquish everything, but we need to embrace what helps us on our journey, makes us a bit smarter, and maybe spot some of the edges that we won't. Joe, in your world, in InsurTech, right? If you get that data wrong, if you trust the data too much, relinquishing that control, that could cost the company a lot of money, right? You could underwrite a whole load of bad insurers, right?
Yeah, there is a bigger risk there. And I think that we've all been kind of saying it in different ways, but data and algorithms, especially data science algorithms, are very good at what we would say interpolation. So understanding things they've seen before and kind of making the things in the middle of the things we've seen before, kind of thing. So they're really good at looking at thousands of cases that were very similar and understanding the nuance between those. But they're very, very, very bad at extrapolation. So the edge cases that you mentioned, they're not good. That just by the way they work, they don't extrapolate well. And that's where humans come in, because humans are much, much better at extrapolating. So to play to the strengths of both the parties and say, save the time of the people who are having to look through that kind of data, and instead lean on algorithms to do that, but lean on the domain expertise of the people in the cases where the algorithm is unsure. And it's a really good idea when you're training algorithms like that to understand the uncertainty as well as the decisions they're making.
Okay.
And in insurance, that presents itself as we can, especially in InsurTech where we have less data, we can make decisions on the data we do have, but we also need domain expertise. We need actuaries, we need people who understand risk collaborating with algorithms to do the best.
Okay. Fit for purpose. Use it for the things it's good at and supplement it for the things it's not.
Better together.
Better together, like that. Sam?
I think Joe raises a really important point about the sort of internal validity of what happens with most of the data we have. So everyone in this room is probably different, but the risk is that we have lots of people that use our services that are quite similar, and we then base things on that. So the heterogeneity of the data is lower than we want it to be. And if we take most entities and then when something else different comes along, the data isn't sensitive enough in order to deal with that difference. And that is a big problem, especially in healthcare. We can't really have that risk. And probably in lots of other areas as well, like insurance as well. It's probably not that different. So that's something we have to look out for. And that, of course, comes down to the bias based on the data sets we actually have. And the majority of data sets, especially in the Western world, are typically biased. So it's something I think we have to look out for. And if we think about more digital services and consider digital poverty, there are a whole bunch of people that probably don't use our services all the time, but our data sets are based on one group of people, not the other.
I like that. Ian, just touching on that a little bit, right? So a few years back, it was well known that you could choose a consultancy who would tell you the answer that you wanted to hear, right? Is that the same with data? Can you interpret it? Can we ask the data questions that we want the right answers to and interpret it in that way? And why is that important to businesses?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think people use data for all sorts of ends and purposes. And I think actually it needs a strong chair or strong chief exec to cut beyond the waffle, the bluster, the hiding behind the data or saying the data's wrong, to actually use it to hold people and business units to account. That's the bit that I see lacking in many organisations I work with. Data is simply not being used because people use it or disrespect it or just say it's invalid. It needs a strong leader at the top to actually say, no, enough, right, that is telling us something. Let's now make an action from that piece of insight.
And I think that backs up what some of the other panel members have been saying, that you can't just put a leader in place or a team in place who just follow the data, right? You've got to have some nous for your business, some experience in the area in which you're operating, right? And I think that's where you get that better together thing. I like that. We're going to use that one.